34 minutes is how long it took to train an AI system that outperformed the conventional approach by nearly 3 to 1. The conventional approach took 36 hours and used 100 times more energy and still failed most of the time. But a research team at Tufts just demonstrated that when you teach a machine to reason through a problem instead of brute forcing its way through millions of examples, everything changes at once. And this is far beyond the regular reasoning that you've been hearing about so far. With this, the system gets better and cheaper and faster, not as a trade-off, but a collapse of trade-offs. And that's a useful frame for today, where a single protein turns out to be the switch for brain aging. 250,000 new apps hit the App Store in 90 days, and car dealerships in New Zealand are advertising for used EVs because they've sold every new one that they had. Let's jump in. Matthias Scheutz's team at Tufts built something called a neuro-symbolic system. And I know that sounds like jargon, so let me translate. Most AI today learns the way a toddler might if you locked them in a room with 10 million picture books and no parent. They absorb patterns. They get weirdly good at recognizing things they've never seen before. But when you ask them to do something genuinely new, something that requires logical planning, they kind of freeze. Now, the Tufts system doesn't work that way. It combines pattern recognition with actual rules, shape rules, balance rules, sequence logic. Before the model even moves, it plans. And before it plans, it reasons. Now, they tested this on the Tower of Hanoi, a classic puzzle where you move stacked disks between pegs following specific constraints, right? Conventional AI systems solved it only 34% of the time, but the neuro-symbolic system hit 95%. On a harder variant the system had never encountered, it still succeeded 78% of the time. The conventional models scored 0 on that second one. And here's the number that carries the most weight for your life personally. Training energy dropped by 99%. This is inference energy, which is the cost of actually running the system once it's trained. Right now, data centers take up about 10% of electricity in the US, and that number is climbing really fast, even as planned data centers face delays, and there isn't enough electrical equipment to power them. If neuro-symbolic approaches deliver even a fraction of this efficiency gain over a scale, then the bottleneck really loosens. Not because we built more power plants or more data centers, but because the AI got smarter about how it thinks and far more efficient. The most expensive way to solve a problem, it turns out, is just not thinking about it and throwing compute at it as much as possible until something finally works. Does that sound familiar at all? This joins a lineage that the Century Report has been tracking. In March 18th, the Mamba 3 architecture showed that a fundamentally different mathematical approach could match transformer performance with linear instead of quadratic scaling. And yesterday, Zhejiang University's study showed that brain signal-guided models outperform systems 14 times their size on abstract reasoning. And now Tufts is showing that structured reasoning plus neural networks obliterates pure neural networks on both capability and efficiency. So this is 3 different teams, 3 different methods, and the same conclusion. The era where bigger model equals better model is the only game in town, that's ending. And what's replacing it isn't one alternative either. It's a whole ecology of architectures, each optimized for different kinds of thinking. All right, let's shift away here from how machines learn to what humans are building with them. Something remarkable showed up in Apple's data yesterday, and something a little alarming is also hiding inside of it. 235,800 new apps were submitted to the App Store in the first 3 months of 2026 alone. Now that is an 84% increase over the same period just last year. And it reverses, by the way, 8 straight years of decline. So from 2016 to 2024, new app submissions fell 48% total. The app ecosystem was consolidating. Fewer creators, bigger companies, higher barriers. Then AI coding tools arrived. Anthropic's Claude Code was the big behemoth at first, right? And then there was OpenAI's Codex. Dozens of others have now appeared since then, and the curve flipped overnight. The term for what's happening, of course, is vibe coding. You've heard this before. Collins Dictionary's word of the year for 2025. You describe what you want in plain English, the AI writes the code, and you ship it. An entrepreneur in Illinois, a flashlight seller on Amazon, used Alibaba's AI tool Akio to compress months of supplier research into a single chat session and had a redesigned product back online within a month. That story, reported by MIT Technology Review, captures the dynamic perfectly. The barrier between I have an idea and I have a product used to be years of technical education or thousands of dollars in contractor fees, sometimes millions, and now it's a conversation. That's it, a conversation. But I want to be really honest about this because there is a quality problem that's also growing as fast as the creation boom. And this is kind of a natural growing pain when it comes to new things. People try it out, they learn about it, and something this monumentally impactful is of course going to have the same type of growing pain at first. A new job title has now emerged here, Vibe Coding Cleanup Specialist. This is a real thing. People are hired specifically to fix security vulnerabilities and errors that AI-generated code routinely contains. Amazon held an emergency engineering meeting in March after production outages traced to AI-assisted code. You'll remember that. Apple itself removed 3 of the most popular vibe coding apps from its store last month because they let users build and deploy apps that bypassed Apple's review process entirely. Now here's where it gets really genuinely strange. Microsoft, the company spending more on AI than almost anyone on Earth despite not having a true flagship product. They have Copilot terms of service that classify the product as, and I'm quoting, for entertainment purposes only. TechCrunch surfaced this a little while ago. The company markets Copilot to enterprises, integrates it into Office, charges for it, and the legal fine print says, don't rely on it for anything important because it's entertainment only. So it's not a disclaimer. This is an admission that the gap between what these tools produce and what those outputs can be trusted for remains wide open. So what you're looking at here is an explosion in creation. Genuinely democratized, yes, and genuinely exciting, genuinely expanding for everybody who gets to build software, running ahead of any system designed to verify what's being created. The scarce resource now isn't code anymore. Anybody can generate code now. The scarce resource is the judgment to know whether that code could ship. And I'm not the only one saying this. There's a lot of people out there who have been saying this for a lot longer than I have. And the University of Pennsylvania's research on cognitive surrender, which we covered just 2 days ago, suggests that judgment is exactly what erodes fastest when the tool feels effortless, which again, these tools are designed to feel that way. So yeah, that's going to be an important skill going forward here. All right, let's shift away from digital creation to physical markets now, and a pattern that just reached its 3rd continent in a week. Yesterday, Clean Technica reported that New Zealand plug-in vehicle sales surged 278% year over year in March. We talked about this just a little bit the other day. We're going to dig deeper into it now. Market penetration hit 26% there. One Christchurch dealership sold 168 EVs in a month, and 40 is normal there, by the way. A buyer in Auckland visited eight different dealers in the $45,000 price range and found every single brand completely sold out. BYD's New Zealand general manager said 900 vehicles arriving in both April and May are already spoken for, and that BYD's Asia Pacific leadership is having to redirect supply from other countries as necessary. And here's the detail, though, that makes this different from every previous EV adoption wave, because we've had these before. There are no government incentives. New Zealand removed its EV purchase incentives. The demand came back anyway, driven entirely by the currently 25% fuel price increase in a single month, courtesy of the Iran conflict. The Century Report documented Australian dealerships emptying on Saturday. BYD reportedly moving 800 vehicles a day in Queensland alone. Diesel passed $3 a litre, and before that, on March 28th, we documented UK households driving record monthly surges in solar panels, heat pumps, and EV chargers. Same trigger, same pattern, but different continent this time. But possibly the most revealing quote came from BYD's own Warren Wilmot. He said, and I'm quoting here, "It's not the cost of fuel. It's the thought that they might not be able to drive." Close that quote. So listen to that again. It's not the cost of fuel, but the fact that they may not be able to drive. That's what he's saying the motivation is. So the motivation is not purely just savings, it's certainty. When people start buying EVs, not because electricity is cheaper than petrol, but because petrol might not be available at all, that is a different kind of demand. This is not price sensitive. This is not subsidy dependent. This is survival math. And survival math doesn't reverse when fuel prices dip. Once you've experienced the anxiety of wondering whether your car will have fuel next week, the EV becomes the safe choice permanently. That's what is happening across 3 continents simultaneously without any coordinated policy and without any government program. Just millions of individual decisions all pointing in the same direction. So this is no longer governments and companies trying to incentivize a push towards something that has been there now for quite a long time, and we've been trying to incentivize it for quite a long time. What's happening now is people are realizing that the option is there, the option is now affordable enough to use, and the structure that supports it underneath with charging, etc., is now strong enough and improving day by day to use as well. We are seeing the flip to EV happening now. And in Malaysia, where fuel is heavily subsidized and cheap, Proton's electric sub-brand still became the country's leading EV seller with nearly 7,000 units year to date, even in a market engineered to make gasoline painless. The direction's still unmistakable. All right, let's shift over to Japan. From consumers choosing the future to a government that has no choice, because Japan's announcement yesterday is one of the most consequential policy documents of the year, I think, and it's barely getting any coverage, so I want to talk about it. Japan's Ministry of Economy formalized a national target: capture 30% of the global physical AI market by 2040. Now, physical AI means robots that operate autonomously in unstructured environments, not factory arms repeating the same motion. It's not the same thing. This is instead systems that navigate hospitals, for example, that manage warehouses, that maintain bridges, that harvest crops, that make real-time decisions in spaces previously designed for humans. The reason this isn't just aspirational is demographic. Japan's working age population is projected to shrink by 15 million people over the next 2 decades. 14 consecutive years of population decline. Labor shortages are already the primary driver of AI adoption across Japan's industry. Sho Yamanaka of Salesforce Ventures described it bluntly as industrial survival. The country literally cannot staff its hospitals, its logistics networks, its infrastructure maintenance at current population trajectories. Now, Japan already manufactures roughly 70% of the world's industrial robots. So it has deep expertise in actuators, sensors, motion control, the physical hardware that connects intelligence to the real world. What it's historically lacked, however, is the software layer, the autonomy. And a company called Mujin represents one approach. They're building control software that makes existing industrial robots autonomous without necessarily replacing the hardware. Now, that's really important for Japan because it has decades of installed robotic infrastructure that can be upgraded rather than scrapped. Now, the significance here, though, it extends beyond Japan. South Korea, Germany, Italy, China, they all have fertility rates below replacement. Japan is just the furthest along in that curve. The solutions Japan builds for sustaining essential services through physical AI become templates for every country facing the same cliff on a slightly delayed timeline. When a sovereign nation treats autonomous robots not just as technology sector or as luxury, but as public infrastructure, then the way we think about roads or power grids, then the deployment timeline compresses from when it's commercially viable to when it's physically available. And those are 2 very different timelines. All right, let's shift again. One more, and this one lands really close to home for anyone with aging parents or anyone who plans to eventually age themselves. Researchers at UCSF published in Nature Aging yesterday. They tracked gene and protein changes in mouse brains over time, looking specifically at the hippocampus. That's the part of your brain that forms and retrieves memories. Out of everything they measured, 1 molecule consistently differed between young and old animals, a protein called FTL1. Older mice had elevated FTL1 alongside fewer neural connections and worse memory. So when the researchers artificially boosted FTL1 in young mice, their brains started aging prematurely, and when they reduced FTL1 in older mice, neural connections increased. So memory performance improved. Saul Villeda, the study's senior employer, put it this way: it's much more than merely delaying or preventing symptoms. It is truly a reversal of impairments. Now let me tell you why this is different from the usual breakthrough in mice story that you've heard 100 times, even from me. Most aging research identifies hundreds of things that change as you get old. Inflammation goes up, telomerase shorten, mitochondria degrade, dozens of pathways, all of them tangled together. But what Villeda's team found is a single protein that by itself drives the decline in the brain region most critical for memory. And reducing that one protein doesn't just slow the decline, but rebuilds what was lost. So this is not 100 targets for 100 different drugs. This is one target. And they also showed that FTL1 works partly by disrupting cellular metabolism, and that a compound boosting metabolism could block FTL1's effects, meaning there are at least two different ways to intervene here. The therapeutic search space just got dramatically smaller. And this fits into a pattern of findings the Century Report has tracked across the scientific and medical timeline compression arc. The Rockefeller 7 million cell aging atlas mapping body-wide regulatory hotspots. Baylor's metformin brain pathway discovery, UCLA and UCSF's identification of a protein complex that tags tau for destruction in Alzheimer's neurons. Each one of these narrows the search. Each one makes aging look less like weather, chaotic, diffuse, and impossible to control, and more like a machine with specific parts that can be individually repaired. All right, 3 from the release tracker today. An open source library called AutoAgent from Third Layer Inc., which autonomously engineers and optimizes its own AI agent systems overnight without human help. It hit number 1 on the spreadsheet bench at 96.5% and the top GPT-5 score on Terminal Bench in a single 24-hour run. Google released its AI Edge Gallery app on iOS, which lets you run Gemma 4 models locally on your phone. So that's on-device inference, no cloud, no data leaving your phone at all. And Intel shipped VLLM Scalar with optimized support for Qwen 3.5 on its B70 AI hardware. So this pushes the 35 billion parameter model onto Intel's own accelerator platform. Here's what I want to leave you with. 34 minutes to train a system that's 3 times more capable and uses 1% of the energy. 250,000 apps created in 90 days by people who couldn't code just a year ago. Dealerships emptied across 3 continents by consumers who didn't wait for anyone's permission. A country treating robots as essential infrastructure because the alternative is that hospitals close. And a single protein that, when dialed down, rebuilds the neural connections that aging destroyed. Every one of these is a story about essentially the same thing. The old constraint, the one everyone assumed was permanent, turns out to be optional. Optional if you change the architecture. Optional if you change who gets to create. Optional if you stop waiting for policy. Optional if you let necessity override caution. And optional if you look closely enough at the biology. So very soon, watch for the Tufts neuro-symbolic approach to get tested on tasks more complex than simple puzzles, because if the efficiency gains hold on real-world robotics, then the energy math for physical AI changes overnight. Watch for App Store quality controls to become a bigger story than App Store growth, because 235,000 apps need vetting, and nobody's built the system to do it at that speed. And watch for the next country's car lots to empty, because the Iran conflict isn't ending. Fuel prices are not falling, and the pattern has now replicated across the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia without a single coordinated policy behind any of it. That's not a trend, that's a tide. We'll see you tomorrow.